Good evening, everybody. Happy Hump Day, and welcome back to Eating the Elephant, our series on Facebook Live, where we talk to you about Hurricane Michael recovery tips, some insurance information, and generally the things that can find a way to take this elephant and break it into bite-sized pieces for you. I got a couple of things tonight I wanted to talk to you about, but first I want to start with a quick thank you to Tower Hill Insurance Company. I'm not going to say they've been perfect. I think they've behaved very well and they've performed well overall. But what I want to thank them for is tomorrow is their last day in town. And I know that might distress some folks, but we're over 5 months in now, and they've been on the ground in town ever since the storm. They showed up, I believe it was the weekend after Hurricane Michael hit, and they have had personnel in town ever since, with some fairly rare exceptions. I mean, we had some breaks for holidays and things such as that. But when everybody else took off and they went back home to their nice offices and got to spend time with their families, Tower Hill personnel have been rotating in and out. And they've been able to help people face to face and do things a little bit old school, which is certainly what I appreciate. I would rather do business eyeball to eyeball with people. So I do want to send a shout out to them and thank them very much for all their help. If you've had difficulties with Tower Hill or still do, tomorrow again is your last day before they take off. Now, just to say that they're leaving town doesn't mean that you can't still get help from them and you can't still talk to your adjuster. It doesn't mean your claim is closed or they're quitting Hurricane Michael. But their traffic in our office really has just dropped to a drizzle for the most part. So it just doesn't make sense for them to stay any longer. But I do appreciate their being here and being willing to stay here on the ground with us after the storm. I want to start a little bit tonight with common ground being the theme. I've really gone out of my way lately to find people on Facebook that I disagree with, and there are many. As an insurance guy, you don't have a lot of trouble finding somebody that doesn't like or doesn't agree with you. And so I've been very hard on attorneys and PAs and AOB contractors. And so in the last couple or 3 weeks, I've made a conscious effort to seek out people that I disagree with. And it's been an enlightening experience, I have to say. I think a lot of those baseline disagreements are still there. The DNA level disagreements certainly aren't going to change. But it has been much more educational than I expected. And when you chat with people you agree with, it's a little bit difficult to learn something sometimes. But when you meet with people that you disagree with, I've been amazed at how much I've been able to learn in a very short period of time when I actively seek out opposing points of view. And it's been very interesting. And for people that want to have a respectful debate, I invite that. And those of you, and you know who you're talking about, you know who I'm talking about, I would say thanks for the time that you've given me. Time is a very precious commodity now, and spending a little time with me, even though you knew we probably wouldn't agree on everything, has been important. I would suggest to you that you might try the same thing. It's very encouraging and it's good for the soul. And I would say if you find somebody, particularly on Facebook, say, or other social media, and they post something that disagrees with your point of view, particularly if they disagree with a post that you've placed, then I would suggest before you snap back and you really jump back on them, take a minute, take a deep breath, maybe look at their Facebook page and find out what they're about. A good recent example of this is I talked to an AOB contractor. You guys know I have been just rabid in opposition to AOB issues and fraud, and I have asked several people if the current pending legislation is not a good idea, then bring me something, bring me a solution I can get behind. And I spoke for about 30 or 35 minutes with a contractor that I really thought we were just going to be pulling each other's hair out through the phone. But before I engaged him and before I invited him to have a conversation, which he very graciously agreed to, I went on his Facebook page and found out a few things about him, and it sort of humanized him. And I found out, most importantly, that he's going to be a new dad before very long. And being a parent, being a father is the best thing that's ever happened in my life. And so that was something that we were able to engage in just a little bit, and just enough to get the peace between us so we could have a rational, reasonable conversation and talk facts instead of spitting flames back at each other and developing a nice long popcorn thread. So I would encourage you, seek out other points of view, seek out people that disagree with you. Getting back into the insurance sort of content, I want to talk about a term that's been asked about this week, and it's called latent defect. And I know that sounds a little funny. It's probably not a term most of you have heard before, but it has come up in the claims process. And what it is latent defect is something that is wrong, in this case with your home, that you didn't know about. Maybe you had mold behind your walls before the storm. Maybe you had, say, rotting. The most common thing that we've seen is probably rotten plywood. A couple months after the storm, you had plywood maybe that was really rotten to the point of just crumbling in your hand, and that doesn't really get there overnight. It takes a long time for that sort of thing to develop, and that would indicate a long-term leak, something that wasn't related to the storm. And so latent defect is not something that typically is covered by an insurance company. The good news for people is when it's discovered as part of a tear-out process or something with regard to the storm, then often you kind of get lucky, quite honestly, because it's a problem you didn't know you had. It's discovered at exactly the right time to get it fixed. And insurance companies are often paying for those kinds of things right now just in order to sort of get past the claim process, because it may be a very minor part of a much larger claim. And so that may be a very small silver lining in the gray clouds that we see. There are some other ways you can get to latent defect and some other things that have been covered up maybe prior to the hurricane that have been revealed and in most cases are being paid for by insurance companies. We're looking at water leaks have been the number one, probably, particularly old roof leaks that people didn't know about. We're looking at dry rot. And the other issue that we're finding a lot of is improper installation. Maybe there was some roofing that wasn't done quite right. We've seen improper window installation has been a very significant issue. And bad seals around doors and windows. Or even worse, missing seals. Matter of fact, I sort of discovered some stuff here at my house. We were missing part of the seal underneath the garage door, and that's been allowing water to get into the garage. Didn't really notice it until you see high winds and stuff, and then you pull the garage door up and you look and you go, well, that's pretty obvious. So latent defect is something that generally is not covered. As we say, it's sort of an inherent defect in a home. It could be a car. It could be almost anything. But if you hear that term, typically it means that something has been wrong with your home or your car or whatever for quite some time, and it's not probably a result of the storm. If there is any doubt, if you can't tell whether this was a latent defect or was a result of the storm, it's going to be covered. Because as I've told you many times, ambiguity is construed in your favor. The insurance company gets to write the contract, they set the procedures, they do the underwriting, they set the price. So if there's any question whatsoever as to whether something's very, very black and white, the benefit of the doubt always goes to you. And sort of the last topic I want to cover is we're getting to a point where people are very, very frustrated sometimes with contractors, PAs, attorneys, things like that. And there's been questions over and over and over again since right after the storm about how you get rid of a provider that is not doing things your way. I talked to you all very, very early on about this as something of a tug of war against the recovery process is a tug of war against the storm. And you need people on your team that are going to pull the rope in the same direction with you. You guys need to pull the same way, the same direction all the time. And if you find somebody on your team that's not pulling their weight, or worse yet, they're trying to pull off in their own direction, they have their own motivations, then you need to kick that person off the team. And sometimes it sounds much, much easier than it actually is. But there are some pretty consistent ways to go about this. The first thing is you need to do your homework. You need to gather information. If it's a public adjuster, you need to make a list of all the contacts you have or haven't had, unreturned phone calls, unreturned emails, things such as that. Promises that were made that weren't kept. Many people have a portal they can go onto, and you should get information off of that portal. The same goes with insurance company adjusters. You should keep a good record of that. And if you have unreturned phone calls or if you have unreturned emails, you have promises that were made, hey, I promise I'll get you this by next week, and it doesn't happen and you have to follow up again, you need to sort of make a good list of that. You need a timeline. And what I would suggest to you is, in all of these things, the best way to do this is something you can either do a timeline or what I would call an executive summary. A page or two of just an explanation of what's gone on and what's not gone properly. Something that a regulator or an attorney or somebody that's just picking this up brand new will understand very, very quickly, because chances are you'll have lots and lots of information. You may have a stack of documents. You may have reports and inspections and bills, invoices, paid stuff. You may have copies of checks. But what's really, really effective when you either go to a regulator or an attorney or something like that is to have a very reasonable, understandable summary in plain English that people can understand. I think it's a really good idea to have that, and the quicker you get that down on paper, you can certainly add to it. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can scribble it in crayon for that matter. Keep good notes though, and then once you've got all of that information collected and you've set it up, you need to send a certified letter to the person you're cutting loose. If it's, again, a public adjuster, say a contractor that you may have given a deposit to and you want that deposit back, certified letter is the best way to go because that's an official sort of understanding of, well, it's kind of hard to avoid those. Once you send a certified letter, you can prove that you're trying to tell the person it's time to go. And sometimes people get so excited by seeing that, and I don't mean excited in a good way. If you see a certified letter, people understand that's something important and they need to pay attention to it. And you may get a different level of attention just for doing that. But lay out your facts. And then what I would suggest that you do is you send a copy of that information to your insurance company adjuster. If it's about the insurance company adjuster, you need to send it to their supervisor. You need to send it to an appropriate regulator, the Department of Financial Services, for instance, if it's, say, a PA or an insurance company, the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, if it's a contractor. And frankly, be a pain and call them out. If you're very annoying, particularly if you're dealing with a contractor or a public adjuster, the more annoying and the more often you can be in touch with them and burn their time and aggravate them, the more happy they're going to be to let you go. And call them out or threaten to call them out on social media, in public, Google reviews, whoever it is. It might be worth it for them to just say, look, I don't want this bad PR. I'm going to let this person go and get on with their life so I don't catch the bad PR. And I think those are probably very effective moves. The last thing I would say is that we're going to come up Sunday, we're going to talk about looking under the hood of your insurance policy, because I think it's getting to the point where we need to be moving on to where you're going to be 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. And we have to remember, fortunately or unfortunately, hurricane season's not that far away. We're sneaking up on June 1st and pretty quickly. So again, we're going to be talking about looking under the hood. I want to bring us back to where we always start, which is our 4-point plan for your success after the hurricane. Educate, advocate, escalate, and mediate. Educate yourself, as you're doing right now. Advocate for yourself. Push. Call people. Remind them. Call them again. Email them. Stay on it. You have to advocate for yourself and be a squeaky wheel. Escalate. Ask for a supervisor. Ask for somebody's boss. Take it to a regulator. Do whatever you have to do and go as far up the food chain as you need to. And finally, mediate. If none of that's going to work for you, if it's not happening, then what you'll have to do is probably talk to somebody at the Department of Financial Services in Tallahassee and take advantage of their free mediation services. Thanks for listening to us, and we'll be back to you again talking to you about looking under the hood of your insurance policy on Sunday. Hope you have a great rest of the week.